Hello, Jamaicans at home and abroad. I am Cleveland Tomlinson, Junior Spokesperson for Finance and Planning. Welcome to the People's Parliament. I will be your moderator for today's post-budget debate discussion. Joining me are the Leader of the Opposition and President of the People's National Party, Mark Golding.
Greetings.
And the Opposition Spokesperson for Finance and Planning, Julian Robinson.
Good to be here.
So the opposition made its contribution to the ongoing debate, the budget debate in Parliament, and we're here to dissect and digest some of the content provided by both speakers. Before we get into the discussion, let's hear what some Jamaicans had to say regarding the opposition's contribution to the budget debate. Jerome Jackson, 957, on TikTok said, "There's hope for Jamaica." Let's hear from him ourselves.
After watching Mr. Mark Golding yesterday, there's hope for Jamaica. I'm so proud to be a Jamaican and that there is hope for our country. Thank you.
Isaiah Newell, 525, on Instagram said, "So how the JLP was saying PMP has no plans. Come save us," at Mark Golding and Julian J. Robinson. Never Solomon on Facebook said, "Mark Golding beat and teach them yesterday. Michael Manley resurrected yesterday. There are two great leaders alive in today's world, Mia Mottley in Barbados and Mark Golding of Jamaica. Can't wait for the election dates to be announced." There you have it. The people have spoken. In case you did not get to watch the budget debate, don't worry. We will break it down for you right here. We will share with you some key points provided by the Leader of the Opposition and the Opposition Spokesman for Finance regarding the challenges facing the Jamaican people and our policy prescription to respond to those issues under the next PNP government. We will start the discussion by looking at our 5E strategy for growth. In his contribution, the opposition spokesman in finance laid down 4 E's that will underpin the strategy to achieve export-led growth: efficiency, education, energy, and the emerging industries. In his presentation, the Leader of the Opposition added another E to that strategy, which broadly underpins and is the foundation for this pillar that we want: ethics. And we'll start there. Opposition Leader, why ethics and why we want it a part of the strategy?
The country is underperforming partly because of the level of corruption in the society and the kind of behaviors that are exhibited on a daily basis, which tend to undermine individual productivity. We need to look back at who we are as a nation, who we are as individuals, put God in the center of our lives, and move from there by developing the kind of attitudes and the values that can make us productive as a people, caring for each other, respecting each other, behaving in a way that exhibits personal responsibility and awareness of our place in the society, our responsibilities to each other, and the direction that we want to go as a nation to achieve the greatness that we're capable of. And that we've just encapsulated all of that under the concept of ethics. And the plan is to have a process, a movement, led not by politicians, but by leaders in society who are seen to be independent-minded and have a strong reputation for moral uprightness, and for them to carry the ball to get everybody on board with this idea of moving Jamaica to a better place in terms of our moral compass and our approach to these kinds of issues, dealing with each other and dealing with the society as a whole.
It seems nostalgic though. It seems as if we have been here before in the past where there was a concerted national consensus around the fact that we need to address the moral decay. And something was started under a PNP government under former Prime Minister PJ Patterson. What happened to that? And is that something you are looking to revise?
Well, when PJ Patterson was Prime Minister, he had sought to roll out a values and attitudes program. Unfortunately, it got sacrificed on the altar of political tribalism. And that is why, looking back on it, I think The approach now has to be that we as politicians don't seek to lead this, but we support it and we engage in it and we give it our fullness of support. But it must be led by persons in the society who are not seen as being politically partisan, but are seen as being purely for Jamaica and for a more righteous Jamaica. And I believe the churches want to see this happen. I believe many civil society actors want to see this happen. And I believe most well-thinking Jamaicans recognize that this will put us on a much stronger footing as we tackle the difficult challenges of national development.
All right, I think that this is a step in the right direction. Broadly, there has been huge support for addressing the moral decay. So I think that this should augur well for overall growth. So we're moving to next E, a big one, efficiency. Streamlining government processes to improve productivity and competitiveness. You spoke largely about that in your presentation, Julian. Tell the people why that is important and what the PNP plans to do in finer details to address efficiency in government.
All right, so when you think of our economy, the government is the largest player in terms of its own expenditure. One of the issues that has impeded growth is that we have been unable to spend our capital budget for the last 3 financial years. For the last financial year, we underspent by $19 billion. Capital budget means roads, schools, hospitals, etc. When you spend the capital budget, you're injecting money in the economy, you're facilitating growth. So our inability, whether it be through an antiquated procurement process, whether it be through a very inefficient public investment management process, we are committed to fixing those things. It's really not acceptable in a scenario where your capital budget is relatively small in terms of your overall budget that you can't spend it. So, our opposition leader has already said he is going to lead the effort in when there are obstacles in dealing with the red tape, in determining what needs to be amended, changed in terms of legislation, but also in terms of government's own processes to ensure that large-scale projects can go through. One of the big issues we have when you have projects which cut across ministries, agencies, and departments, they don't necessarily have an owner. The Prime Minister has to step in there. And our opposition leader has said that when he becomes Prime Minister, he will lead that effort. So we're committed to ensuring that government spends the money it does it efficiently and effectively so that we can have that multiplier effect throughout the economy and achieve economic growth. So that's one pillar. But we also spoke about how we can incentivize businesses. We want businesses to be the backbone of our growth. And when we look at our businesses, our micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises are the foundation of that growth. We're saying we're going to give them incentives. For the first 3 years of the operation, we're going to waive corporate income tax. Now, why are we doing this? Many MSMEs stay outside the formal system to avoid paying tax. We want them to come into the formal system. But we're saying go there, grow your business, sell your services, sell your goods, and you don't have to worry about corporate income tax for the first 3 years. We're also saying we're going to ensure that you have good access to DBJ money. There's DBJ money, but the way it is structured, many of them can't access it. Why? Because the fees, the upfront fees that are required, for example, if you take out a $10 million loan, 5% fees, right? $500,000, you may not be in a position to find that money up front. We're saying we're going to put that at the back end of the loan, extend the payment cycle so that you don't have to find the money up front and you can access the money. When I sit in Parliament, it bothers me that there's so many occasions where we have to return money that is allocated to the DBJ because people can't access it. So we want to make government more efficient. We want to provide the support for all micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises that they can grow. They're the engine of growth.
I want to know, Comrade Leader, does the PNP have any track record in this regard? What did we do in our last administration, if anything, to enable the ease of doing business as a strengthen our
When we were last in government from 2012 to 2016, I was the Minister of Justice and I chaired the Legislation Committee of the Cabinet. And I worked very closely with the different ministers to help them deliver on their legislative agendas, including in the area of improving ease of doing business in the country. One of the things we did, for example, was we put together the current process where if you're going to register as a business, whether as an individual registering a business name or forming a company, you can get all of your necessary statutory filings done in one single process. So the incorporation of the company or the registration of a business name gives you not only the registration or incorporation certificate, but you get your NIS number, your GCT registration.
It's like a one-stop shop.
One stop. So when the certificate comes back, all of those numbers are on the certificate. And the TCC for the first 6 months of operation. We did that. And in fact, the achievement was significant because Jamaica improved its ranking internationally for ease of doing business and competitiveness as a result of that and other things that we did. I'm just giving you that as one example. So I think that I have a particular skill in this area. And I think a lot of the things that need to be done involve the re-engineering of processes and the changing of archaic rules that were developed sometimes many, many decades ago and are no longer fit for purpose. The JLP approach to this has really been to abandon all of that structured fixing of efficiency, but rather have one or two ministers who will make phone calls to civil servants or the public body managers if there's a problem and try and push it through. But that's not a system that leads to any structural change, and it's not sustainable, and it also is conducive to corruption. So we want to have a structured approach, which I will chair, that will be working closely with the business community, because we see this really as Team Jamaica. It's time for Team Jamaica. We all need to get on board to drive the economy forward, because we have a problem with a stagnant economy. Despite all of the efforts and sacrifices and the great improvements in the public debt over 2 administrations, we still haven't cracked that nut, which is high levels of inclusive, sustainable economic growth. It's going to require all hands on deck. And I intend to lead the process of driving efficiency across government.
Comrade Leader, in the last 9 years of the Wellness administration, the Prime Minister consolidated several agencies within his portfolio. So we have the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation reporting directly to the Prime Minister, several other portfolios based within the office of the Prime Minister. What has been the outcome of this? Has it advanced efficiency in the public service, or has it impeded it?
I don't think it has worked. I mean, first of all, most of the major public bodies are all concentrated in one ministry, which he's the minister of. And it is conducive of delay and a bottleneck system. I mean, I've personally experienced this. As an attorney, I was doing a transaction a year or so ago for a client who owned property downtown, and they were selling to another big company that also has operations downtown. There was a particular property which was leased from the UDC and which had operated really as a kind of corporate citizenship hub where they delivered services to the surrounding community, training and so on. The people buying the property want to take over the lease. The lease had the standard provision that requires consent of the landlord to assign the lease from the company that was selling to the company that was buying. It has taken over a year to get that consent because they say they have to get the Prime Minister's signature on the consent. How can you run a government where a board of the UDC is unable to make those kind of decisions, and it has to be kicked up to not only the cabinet level, but the Prime Minister just to sign a consent in a very uncontroversial, mundane, everyday type of thing? This is the kind of problem that you have when you concentrate so much power and so much responsibility within one aspect or one silo of government. And it's also conducive to conflicts of interest. For example, NEPA, the NRCA, which is the environmental watchdog agency for government, is cited in the economic growth and job creation industry. And what has that led to? Numerous instances of environmental violations which are not dealt with in a way that brings accountability to those who have done wrong. So we've had so many instances of pollution in the Rio Cobre, and there's really been nothing done, in my opinion, effectively to stop that happening. Another one happened a week or so ago, a big spill, and I've seen a report in the paper today that the Water Commission is going to have to shut down some of the inflow of water from the Rio Cobre because of a high pH level in the water, which I would think may have a strong relationship to that spill. There was a scandalous situation in Fort Rocky where sand dunes were allegedly flattened to create a car park for the entertainment zone without proper environmental stewardship. Not to mention other damage that was done to the fauna and flora, the vegetation and so on there. Now, though, that's a very vulnerable area of land. It's because of right by the sea, and it protects the harbor. And by protecting the harbor, it protects the foreshore of downtown Kingston. If you breach that by taking away the natural protections that exist and you don't replace it with anything, you're really leaving the airport exposed, you're leaving the harbor exposed, you're leaving the foreshore of downtown Kingston exposed.
So NEPA can't have the sort of fixity of purpose that it needs to have to deliver on its mandate.
That seems to be the case, because at the end of the day, environmental concerns are always subordinated to other issues of economic, trying to drive a commercial transaction or investment or whatever. But the environment is almost like ethics. The environment is supremely important, because the sustainability of a life on Earth depends on proper environmental stewardship. So you can't have a short-sighted approach when it comes to environmental issues. You must have that balance.
Before we move on, though, he has pivoted, the Prime Minister has pivoted to announcing a new portfolio, the efficiency portfolio, based again within his office. What do you make of that?
I think that was a response to some of what we've been saying to the business community about this issue and the role that I intend to play. I think some of that got back to him, and he thought he needed to respond to it. So he's created this new sub-portfolio within his ministry, and he's invited the former ambassador to the US, Audrey Marks, to head that portfolio. And I wish her well with it. It's not just efficiency. I think it's digital transformation and innovation as well. You know, we'll see how effective that is. But to my mind, the whole structure of the ministry is wrong. And I don't think that the skill sets that are required to really focus on the re-engineering of processes and rules, which are often legally drafted instruments. You need somebody who has a facility for dealing with that. Because at the end of the day, the bureaucracy is a rule-based system. And people are not going to move out of their comfort zone of applying the rules because the rules don't make sense, because they can be censored for that. So you have to fix those things, and it requires an attention to detail to be able to do that.
If it's one thing the PNP has championed since its existence, is education. In 1957, Norman Manley introduced the Common Entrance Exam, and in 1975, Michael Manley repealed the Bastard Act, allowing many more children to gain greater access to education in schools. I noticed that it was a consistent theme in the presentation from Julian and you about education, but the administration says it has been doing something. Why is what it's doing not good? And what's the PNP's alternative to that, Julian?
I think the first thing we have to accept is that the education system, as it is structured, is failing us as a society. It may be a strong term, but I would classify it as an apartheid type system. We have a number of very good schools where children do very well from PEP. They go in, they get very good results. But if you look at all the studies, whether it's the current Patterson report, if it's the Ray Davis report from 20 years ago, anything anecdotal, we have too many students who leave after 10 years of formal education, leave high school illiterate, innumerate, and without the skills to function properly. That's just a fact.
But they're creating the pathways after.
Yeah. So keeping students in school for 2 additional years when they don't have the basic skills doesn't solve the problem. You have to get to the root of the problem. If you want a manifestation of that problem, when you hear employers are saying we need to import labor, right? Yes, we have low unemployment, but we still have thousands of Jamaicans who are outside the formal workforce.
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands. It means that the education system is not delivering the quality and the type of skills needed to grow the economy. And there are also many other problems that arise, the antisocial behavior and crime. Now, what are we saying? Yes, the government is doing things, but we're saying you can't tinker with this problem. It is a fundamental problem, and to address it fundamentally, you have to tackle it at the early childhood level, which means basic and primary school, where you have to get children to be literate, numerate, and to be able to do some basic maths, right? We are saying put the resources, which are finite, which are limited, ensure that the resources are put there. Yes, there's pathways, there are some grade 7 interventions, but you have to get it right at the beginning. What we're doing is we're doing a lot of remedial work. We're spending a lot in remedial. But if you fix it early And what we have seen is that there are interventions that can make a difference within 1 year, where you can get children to be able to read and write with the proper interventions after a year. And we are saying we are committed to doing that intervention early in a child's life cycle so that when they leave primary school, they're literate and numerate, and they don't have to be catching up after that.
I don't think we could have a discussion about education and the challenges in the sector without addressing this major concern raised by stakeholders, and it's the continuation, the continued progression of students from year to year without them meeting the necessary and appropriate reading level and arithmetic level. Is that something the PNP would be open to looking at?
We certainly are. I mean, as Julian has said, we really need to get early childhood and primary school right. You know, it requires ensuring that the teacher training is appropriately configured for that level, that we have a nutrition program that can support children being adequately fed so that they're coming to school and not hungry. And also we have to ensure that the necessary physical infrastructure to support that is in place in the primary schools and in the basic and early childhood institutions. We're committed to that. We're also looking at, and part of that would be that if children need some more attention, some more time on the foundations before they move up to the next level, they are given that opportunity, you know. So with rushing people through the motion, through this
like a conveyor
sequence, when they haven't achieved the level that they need to achieve, there's not doing them any good service, because the chickens will come home to roost later, and they'll be struggling later on because they haven't got those basics in place.
Right. You mentioned a point in your contribution a while ago about nutrition, eating, and that kind of sustenance needed for learning. And I recall the opposition spokesperson announced the EASE program. What is that program about? What's the difference between it and PATH?
So we're saying EASE is ensuring adequate sustenance for excellence. Now, what we're saying is we know there are students on PATH, but every single member of parliament, you don't have to be a member of parliament to know that there are hundreds, thousands more needy Jamaican students and individuals who can't get on PATH for various different reasons. Whether when the assessment is done, they come into a home, they might say a flat screen TV, it might be a normal flush toilet, and they're denied access. We're saying we're going to go beyond the students who are on PATH. If you look at the school system, there are too many students who, in any given day, I go into my constituency on a school day, and I will see students at home, and you ask the parents, why are they not there? Well, I don't have the lunch money to send them to school. We're saying we're going to go beyond PATH. We're going to do an assessment. The school actually knows who the needy students are. And what the schools do now, they supplement the PATH program. They get donations from their PATH students.
What's the current allocation for PATH?
It's $280 per student per day for lunch, right? $280, which we know is not sufficient, right?
That's only for the students who are on PATH.
Those are the ones on PATH. What the schools are doing is stretching that. Whatever allocation they get, they do their own fundraising, and then they stretch it beyond the PATH students to students who they know are needy.
But this is where the apartheid system that Julian talked about comes in. There are some schools that have the support systems through their old boy or old girl networks and so on that they can raise funds to do kind of supplementary work. But there are other schools that don't have that tradition, don't have that base, and they're unable to provide that kind of additional support. So the state has to step in, and that's where the EASE program comes into it.
And it's not just about nutrition and that kind of sustenance. It's also about getting the students to school, transportation, and that is a core challenge for many parents, particularly in the rural areas. Opposition leader, you announced the program, the RIDE program.
Yeah.
What is that geared towards?
That is geared towards helping those parents and students who struggle to afford the transportation costs of getting to school in rural areas where the state-sponsored transport system doesn't extend, and to give them some additional support through a subsidy. And we have in mind 20,000 students initially, rolling it out to them, and they will get a transportation subsidy. It will be administered through the schools. We'll partner with the public transport operators that provide services to the students in that school. and we'll ramp it up over time as fiscal space allows. And this is very important because, it's a very heavy burden, and what we have is a high level of absenteeism as a result. And, if you miss 1 day of school every week, you're missing 20% of your education. If you miss 2 days of school every week, you're missing 40%. That's a lot. That's, 2/5 out of your education that you never got. We can't grow, we can't develop the country like that. So we need this type of intervention. This is part of ease as well.
Right. And the transportation challenges are compounded by the issues with JUTC. Julian, you spoke very passionately about that. I think I saw a video of you making
No,
the rounds
I feel
on
very
social-
strongly about it.
So you can say so what? You can say so what? And you know why you can say so what? Because the people who use JUTC are the most marginalized in our society from the lowest socioeconomic grouping.
JUTC carried 62 million passengers in 2016. In 2025, it carried 18 million. That's under 30% of what it did 9 years ago. It's not that people have gone anywhere, right? The people still need public transportation. Now they may be taking coasters, they may be taking taxis. What does that do? It's an increased cost. It gets them to school and work. It takes them longer. You have people who live in Portmore and Spanish Town who on average taking them 3 hours to get into Kingston. Imagine a student who has to wake up at 4 in the morning and you don't get to school till 7:38. 3 hours. You're tired, you're haggled, you can't learn properly. Somebody who gets to work can't be productive. And then the same thing in the afternoon, because the government has not invested in the fleet of JUTC. But what is worse, the JUTC's operating costs are as high today as they were 9 years ago, meaning their staff costs are as high, their spare parts costs are as high. And then they were saying, so what?
Of passengers
Even though they are carrying less than 30% of the capacity, they are spending as much on salaries and wages, on spare parts, all of those things. The place does mismanage. It needs proper management.
So the administration is really trying to catch up because
They're
last year...
They got 100 buses, and I think there were 10 press releases, 10 ribbon cuttings for the 100. 400 buses. And I know another 100 coming, and we give thanks. But listen, you have so underinvested that people have to spend more money on transport, and them have to take 2-3 hours in a trip that should take them 1 hour. None can go so.
Yeah, that's a big area, it's a big pain point for many Jamaicans, and one that the next PNP government will have to look at.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, we see the RIDE program as transitioning into a proper rural transportation system, which is going to be a big investment, and the economy has to grow to support that. But in the meantime, we think it is possible to provide support to rural families who are struggling to send their children to school because of the high transportation costs and the cost of the lunch money every day. So between the lunch money program that Julian outlined and the RIDE program that I've outlined, we're trying to tackle some of the real issues to reduce absenteeism, get the children coming to school 5 days a week as much as possible so that we can have better educational outcomes. And, there's another aspect to it as well. The pathways that you mentioned, which were the last 2 years of school, when the fundamentals aren't there and really it hasn't worked. The design is not right. We want to bring that forward and have essentially vocational training being part of the curriculum from grade 7 onwards, through each high school having a lab dedicated to the type of vocational subjects that by the end of their school career, they'll be operating at level 4 heart so that they can actually go straight from school into the workplace, certified and skilled as a worker to earn a good living from a better job than something that is an unskilled labor. So this is where the vision we have to really make the school system far more responsive to the needs of the economy and the needs of students to ready themselves for the world of work.
All right, so the PNP is really proposing a sort of multifaceted strategy to address the challenges in the education sector.
I want to add, just so we don't forget, we're also saying to businesses, if you are investing in upskilling your own staff to make them more productive, to make them more efficient, we would match dollar for dollar what you are spending to upskill your staff. So that provides an incentive, it increases productivity, it improves efficiency, and it will help to grow the economy.
And the direct benefit of that is that the jobs know the kind of training that the companies know the kind of training that the employees need. Exactly. So you're getting hands-on practical training that directly translates to increased productivity on the job.
Yeah, because I mean, the business community has been calling for the importation of labor from overseas. Obviously, that really should be a last resort. But if we can incentivize firms to expand their own trading, so that they are better able to fund what they need to do to have the workforce that they need. Those training exercises that they develop will be very much tailored to the needs of their own business and the kind of investments that they want to make in their business to grow them. So it would be training which is really much more targeted to a practical application, which is really what training needs to be.
Exactly. Far more targeted and focused on what the actual job is. But the PNP has made a bold commitment, 1 degree per household. What's the pretext for that, and why?
It's based on our social philosophy as a movement, that education is the greatest antidote to intergenerational poverty, and that we're coming out of a history in Jamaica which was very unequal. There was a lot of oppression, a lot of holding back of the masses of the people, and so on. And so we want to ensure that we put in place something that would allow those students who may come from a family that they've never had a history in the family of tertiary education, that we facilitate at least the first one to do it, so that they will then be able to bring others along when they've graduated and they're in the job market and so on, so that each family will kind of be empowered to step up to the next level. And this will be a way of avoiding the transfer of poverty from one generation to the next.
It will be revolutionary, actually.
It will.
An empowerment tool for households and all families in Jamaica. But accessing, as you talk about with tertiary education, accessing financing for tertiary education is a major challenge for students who exit post-secondary education. SLB is a chief sponsor for tertiary financing in Jamaica for students who want loans to access that kind of education. You spoke to some reforms that will be implemented on the next PNP government. I wanted to break it down particularly for that demographic that would be interested.
So what we're saying, there are two main things we're saying. One, we're going to extend the moratorium after you graduate by 6 months before you start to repay. And the reason we're doing that, many people, it takes time after you graduate to find a job, to settle in. You have other expenses. You might have to rent somewhere, deal with transportation because you may not be on campus, etc. So we're saying we're going to give you an additional 6 months.
So currently it's at 14, so PNP will bring it to 20.
20 months, right. Correct. Secondly, and more importantly, we recognize that there's significant levels of what is classified as underemployment, where people are working in jobs not necessarily commensurate with their qualifications or their degree, but they have to do it because those are the available jobs. They're not earning at the level that they can pay the amount required by the Student Loan Bureau. All right, so let's say a simple example. They should be paying $30,000 a month, but the job only allows them to pay $20,000. They're considered in default and delinquent. When you're considered delinquent, your credit score is affected. That impacts your ability to acquire other assets. If you go to the bank for a loan, you're going to get a higher premium, a higher interest rate. If you're trying to buy a house, it affects your credit score. We're saying we are going to formalize your ability to renegotiate the loan consistent with your ability to pay based on your income levels, so that you're not considered to be delinquent or in default.
So when you say formalize, explain it a bit. Can anyone walk in and say, I can't pay this amount, so,
No, what happens, you do have individuals who do that. We're saying to you now, we're going to put in place a system. You obviously have to come with proof of your income, whether you're self-employed or if you get a salary. And let's say your income is $100,000 a month, and there are general, ratios about how much you can pay back in terms of loans. And if you can only pay $20,000, for example, we will allow you to pay the $20,000 but you would not be considered in default.
Right.
So it doesn't affect your credit score.
And to the extent that that defers a portion of the payment that you would have been expected to make if you were earning more, that portion gets deferred and put on the back end of the loan without any penalties or arrears interest on it. So you're not in default. Essentially, we're capping your loan payment at an affordable portion of your actual income. It's for you to establish what your actual income is to the SLB. But once that is established, the loan payments will be capped at an affordable percentage of that.
A good point is that there will be no penalty incurred. I think I've been just doing a cursory check on social media, and many of the concerns were, would there be penalty imposed?
No,
that's
and
very
why
good.
say we're changing it. It would be a new system, so you don't incur the penalty, and you will not be classified in that delinquent or default category.
So that would also necessitate an adjustment in the amount you repay if salaries are upwardly
Yes,
revised.
as your standard of living improves,
you can
get
change.
promoted, and then the amount that you would pay, the cap would necessarily increase with that. So you'd be able to afford more. So you'd pay
I was very
more.
deliberate with that because I was on an interview and they asked me about that. So I said, let me give you the opportunity to respond. But in your presentation, our common leader, you said that during periods of unemployment, you would pause. Students would be allowed or
there would be a suspension of your loan obligation. The payment obligation would be suspended without that being treated as a default. So your credit score wouldn't be impacted. And for the duration of your unemployment, that would be you wouldn't have to be servicing those payments again, would be attacked onto the back end of the loan. So in other words, what we're trying to do is to take the risk, the market risk of the job market, off of the student and let the state bear it. We want to encourage our students to finance their education, get skilled, help to grow the country, help to push national development. Right now, a lot of students are hesitant because the strictness of the loan terms and the way in which the credit management function is rolled out, it puts them at some amount of unease. And we want to say, no, the thing will be designed in a way that as long as you are doing the best you can, you will be able to service your debts. And if you have to go through a period where things are not going well and you're not out of a job, we won't penalize you for that period. Obviously, if it's for an extended period, we're going to be looking at that very carefully. But for reasonable periods of time, you will not be penalized. Those payments will be tacked on at the end, and you will not be considered to be in default.
I think it's a real solution that's responsive and demonstrates an acute awareness of what the real issues are. Because most times, persons having exited tertiary education don't always end up in the job that they are qualified for, or that pays them commensurate to their qualification. So you are exhibiting an acknowledgement of that status quo. That's very good. Opposition leader, I want to ask you a question. Over the past decades, all PNP prime ministers have ensured that they have built either primary schools, secondary schools, or universities. Do you know how many schools this administration, Prime Minister Andrew Holness, former education minister, has built?
Well, in nearly a decade, I don't think he's built one.
Right, they have not built a single school in their almost a decade tenure in office. That's an important point to note. And education is the core of what we need to focus on to drive the economy forward. We were talking about some packages announced in your presentation that would incentivize our talented teachers to be attracted to the system and to be retained in the system. I wanted to talk us.
We have a number of ideas there because we recognize that there's a problem of the teachers, especially the classroom teachers who came out of the salary restructuring program and didn't really feel that they got a fair deal. So we need to devise things that will help them to feel valued and that will provide them with a basis and a reason to stay. So, for example, what we're looking at is we will provide reductions in their if they have student loans, reductions in their student loan debt on an annual basis as they work in the system, so that the longer they stay in the system, the lower their debt will the debt will be reduced, separate and apart from the payments that we're making. It's like a bonus for having stayed and continued in the system as a teacher. Similarly, we want to increase the level of their motor vehicle concession so that they can, the longer they stay, the more valuable their concession becomes in terms of the value that they'd be allowed to import under the concession. We want to remove taxes, all taxes, from tablets and laptops for education, essentially, for students and for teachers in the system. And we want to negotiate a package with an internet provider for our teachers so that our teachers can have free broadband internet access, which we regard really in the 21st century as a tool of trade in education. They must have access to the internet because so many lessons are now most effectively delivered, through the internet system. So we want to negotiate a package deal with the internet provider where the state would absorb that cost. And of course, because we're talking about a lot of teachers, the unit cost per teacher will be less. And so, we want to provide that as a benefit to the teachers as well.
Right. One of the initiatives that you announced in your presentation that has received huge traction from teachers, the NHT financed schemes. In fact, I have a comment from someone on social media, Dr. O'Neill Hall. Teachers, police, nurses, and public sector workers should note for the last 4 budgets, Holness raised the NHT limit, yet we still can't benefit. The higher the limit, the higher housing prices go. Mark's policies tackles this by securing units for teachers and deposit assistance. I think he was referring to the Prime Minister's announcement that he will be lifting the limit that one can borrow from the NHT to finance their housing.
By $1 million.
Right. Contrast that to the PNP's proposal. Why is ours superior?
Well, we have a multi-dimensional set of proposals for housing in the country, really to transform the housing market and the supply of houses. There's a great shortage of affordable houses being built in the country, because although there's been a lot of real estate construction, it has really been more at the high end of the market, and that's out of the reach of typically public servants and other persons who are not, earning big money. So we want to tackle that, and we want to ensure that affordable housing solutions are provided to our people. So one of the things that we're doing for the public sector workers, including our teachers and nurses, our police and so on, we're reinstating the interest rate reduction. They get a discount. They used to get a discounted rate at NHT, and that was taken away by this government. We're going to reintroduce that. So they will get a break on the interest payments that they have to make on their NHT loans. We also want to have a situation where they are allocated allocated homes in NHT finance schemes on a preferred basis so that, they can get in the door, so to speak. And then for the younger persons who are seeking to buy their first homes, as long as they've been contributors for at least 2 years.
And
to
the young
NHT.
owners a deposit fund.
Yeah, the deposit fund for 35 years and under. We will provide a grant out of NHT, a $1 billion facility within NHT's resources, as being earmarked for this, of $500,000 for towards a deposit on the on a home, a new home, because a lot of buyers, and this is not limit. This is generally available. We're going to make this available to all first-time buyers, public servants, and others, where they can get that benefit.
You also announced the rent-to-own initiative. What is that? How would it work?
Well, the rent-to-own is very important, but there are a couple of things that I wanted to also mention as well in relation to this public sector workers. Right now, the debt service coverage ratio that the NHT works with, is based on a rule of thumb that says that you can only, your gross monthly payment, your gross salary must be at least a certain multiple of your loan payment, and that caps how much you can borrow. For public servants, we want to make that a little more flexible so that they can have a more accommodating debt service coverage ratio, so they can borrow a bigger amount.
Currently, the ratio is at 33.8%. I think you said you want to bring that to 40%.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. The rent-to-own initiative, it's one that people have been asking about.
It's a very innovative and important thing. So there are basically 2 categories of persons we have in mind. First of all, there are those who are informally employed. They may be doing their own little business, their own little hustling, or whatever it may be. They may be working for somebody, but that the workplace that they're operating at is not a formal business, and they don't have a pay slip. So they can't go into the NHT and establish that they have a certain earning stream because they don't have any documentation to prove it. What we have said is that we would accommodate them by giving them access on a rent basis initially, and for a period of time, and we don't anticipate it would have to be very long. Once they can establish, and the rent payments would be equal to their mortgage payments, once they can establish that they can meet those monthly payments on a timely basis, we would treat them as having been qualified, notwithstanding the fact that they can't produce a pay slip. Then there's another category of person who's paying rent already and wants to buy a home but simply can't afford to do so. You know, their earnings are not sufficient for them to do so. And so what we want to do with them as well is to say you can rent an NHT finance unit, and over a period of time, a portion of that will go towards your deposit. And then once the deposit portion has been accumulated to meet the deposit that you have to have, you can just flip into a mortgage and become a normal buyer at that stage. So you'd rent, a portion of your rental payments would go towards your deposit obligation, and then once you've met that, then you become the mortgage loan is disbursed, and you become an owner and become a normal NHT borrower at that point.
Right, so you're providing, someone who would rent the opportunity to ultimately own the home.
Yes, and that is because that person can't save. Given their circumstances, they don't have the disposable income to save towards a deposit. So they're just getting by paying rent and food and utility bills, etc. And we're saying if you become an NHT purchaser on the renter-owned scheme, a portion of your rental payments would be credited towards a deposit account, and once that account reaches the level of deposit to buy, boom, you become a borrower, loan disbursed, and you become an owner of the house, and you pay your mortgage going forward.
Right.
I mean, there's one other important thing which I didn't mention, which I should have, and this is perhaps the most important point of all, which is this: for the last 12 years, the central government has been extracting resources every year to fund the budget, taking money out of the NHT to do so, $11.4 billion a year. And this has really impacted the financial strength of the NHT and their ability to pursue their mandate of delivering housing for ordinary Jamaican people. We intend to recapitalize the NHT with public lands that we're identifying for this process, for this purpose, and then we will be financing. Our target is 50,000 affordable house units, and when we will not be including the land cost in the price of the unit. So the unit will just be the construction and infrastructure costs, but not any value attached to the land. So when somebody buys an affordable unit under this program, they will immediately have equity because they will be getting the land portion for free, and it's going to reduce the price of the house for them as well. So whereas the Prime Minister is talking about affordable housing being 14 million, we intend to make affordable housing considerably less than that.
Right, because the central government would absorb the cost of the land.
The value of the land. We're saying the value of the land, we're not going to sell out these purchases of the land. The land will be, because the money was taken out of NHT to fund the budget anyway, we're putting the land back in to restore the capital that was taken from NHT that really should have been used for contributors, and we're going to make that land available without charge in the price of the units for the affordable band of housing. Before we leave the topic of housing, I just want to acknowledge at Sweet Bliss, who had posted a video, saying that having listened to the policy ideas of the People's National Party, she'll be inclined to vote because she can see a way forward, out of the morass of the difficulties of acquiring a home in Jamaica that so many young people suffer under. We've been giving a lot of thought to people like Sweet Bliss and how we can make the system work for them. And I'm glad that she's felt, that is resonating with her.
Right. If we can tackle and fix the housing challenges, we'll be doing a lot for many Jamaicans, especially young Jamaicans. I know for sure that particular initiative will allow many Jamaicans to realize their dream of home ownership. Right. But when you own your home, you have light bill to pay. So we're moving into the next topic, energy. The next E, energy, how we get sustainable energy for growth. Julian, you spoke hugely on this in your presentation.
At the foundation of growing the economy, you have to reduce the cost of energy. Jamaica has probably in the region at the highest rate that we pay for electricity. It both affects individuals. If you ask any individual, what's the highest bill? Is your light bill, right? If you ask businesses simply can't compete because they're paying so much for energy. Now, government has a role, and the role government has is to bring down the cost of energy. And what we have seen since this administration took over 9 years is probably just failure in this regard. The level of renewables that should be added to the grid, they have only, after 8 years, come out with a request for proposal. They have just selected the providers. It will probably take another year or two for those persons to build out, whether it be solar, wind, etc., to add to the grid.
And how quickly did the PNP add the renewable energy when we were last
came in? When we came in 2012, we issued and completed the RFP process by 2013, which led to the build-out in 2016. All right? And as I said, it's taken them 8 years. It's really the cost of corruption because that ministry has seen 4 ministers. There was nepotism, cronyism, and corruption there. It decimated the technical expertise in the ministry and has affected the ability of the government to deliver on the mandate of adding renewables and bringing down the cost of energy.
Since the addition that the last PNP administration made in 2016, we have not seen any further addition.
Not at the level of wide scale,
which right.
sells. These are independent producers who sell back to JPS. No. I mean, individuals would put in their own solar systems.
Yeah, there've been a number of projects. First of all, Wigton was before that, which is the wind was a PNP inspired thing and provides wind generated energy. But in the last PNP government, which Julian was involved, so was I, several requests for proposals were put out, and that all of the major solar, in particular, projects that have come on stream were initiated because of the policies that we put in place, and including a new Electricity Act and a new entity for generation procurement, which is established under that act. We put the framework in place and we brought the investors as well. Since this government came in office for 9 years, they did nothing until last year, where they submitted a request for proposals for 100 megawatts, and they've got some responses. I believe there are 2 investors, but for the record over the period is very, very poor when you consider how fundamental energy is to the overall economy, because everything in the economy runs on electricity and energy. So you have to have a very robust, a very effective energy policy and a mandate to execute on that policy in order for the economy to grow. And the poor growth results that we've seen with this government, including negative growth in 2024, is partly as a result of the very weak performance in the area of energy. That's right.
And the minister, in her presentation, announced an electricity theft program to regularize that sort of arrangement. You had done something in your time when you were in the Ministry of Energy and the last PNP administration.
We started a pilot project in 2014, recognizing that this is a problem. Now, people might say, why you care about people who thief electricity? Well, the reality is that the people who pay an additional 20% to cover those losses, right? So you have to address it. Now, there are many reasons why people end up as in this position. The cost to wire a house so that it can be passed by the government electrical inspector so that you can get legal electricity is prohibitively expensive. You're talking about close to $100,000 for somebody who has a small 1 or 2 bedroom house, all right? Now, what we did in the pilot project, we looked at 7 communities, and it was a partnership with JSIF, JPS, USAID as well. We covered the cost of wiring the house, and at that time, in 2014, it was about $50,000. Now it's closer to 100, even more. We got installation of a meter, in many cases prepaid meters, and then they got prepaid cards. They could buy prepaid cards, similar to the way you put credit on your phone. That took place in 2014. Now, for various reasons, that kind of drive was not continued. So when the minister came and made this big announcement, of course we welcome it. But the question is, why didn't we continue in an earnest way with what we started in 2014? And why it took so long? Because we would have, I wouldn't say cracked the problem totally, but significantly reduced those losses. Now we're saying we're going to go beyond that. We're going to put in mini grids where you have solar installed in communities so that communities can depend on the solar. There is electricity poverty in Jamaica. We just have to call it what it is, right? And to have a sustainable program, you have to have a cheaper source of electricity. So we're going beyond even what the government is saying, and we're proposing different solutions. And you find that a lot of the theft takes place in densely populated inner city type communities. And you can put in mini grids in there so that they don't have to depend on the JPS system to do what to consume in their house. But we demonstrated a commitment to tackling the problem back in 2014. We're disappointed that it has taken so long for something new to come on stream, but we're going beyond what the government is saying. Because if you don't tackle the theft, you can't deal with that 20%, which is added to everybody's bill to cover those losses.
Yeah. So there's a strong social dimension to this because, households who are unable to currently and are not paying for electricity but are using it, they're exposed to serious legal risks because they can be prosecuted for that, and also risks of fire. And in the communities that we're talking about, there are high levels of fire. Many fires and many of them are caused because of the irregular wiring and what have you, the throw-ups and those things. So we really want to tackle that, but we are very conscious of the need to ensure that there's an affordable solution to this. So regularizing is one thing, and the program that the government has announced with $1 billion will just scratch the surface really, because it's going to be limited to 20,000 households, and we know that there's about a 300,000 gap of households who are currently out there and are not lawful customers of JPS and that. So there's a much bigger situation to be addressed. But we want to not only help with the regularizing, but we also want to help with the solarizing of those homes so that they can reduce their costs of use of electricity and make it more affordable for them. And then they, over time, can save and put in batteries and that kind of thing and really reduce their consumption significantly. And then the whole question of microgrids is part of it as well, which has been used in other countries like Bangladesh and others, where you can connect and the solar panels that are being laid out in the community can be interconnected and can actually sell surplus power to the grid and get back and so on, and it helps further manage their overall electricity costs. So they're really thinking about how we can make electricity lawfully accessible to people but affordable as well.
Right. Regarding reducing the cost of electricity for the average household, the Prime Minister announced, I think he did that from his conference last year, the GLP conference. I think he reiterated it in his budget presentation, that they will be reducing the GCT applicable on the average household's light bill. Will that go a far way in helping Jamaicans?
Well, put it this way, we're glad for any reduction of any cost on people. So, we're not going to hit out against it. But the truth is that the imposition of GCT on households, on residential electricity, was done by the JLP as part of paying for this 1 foot. Remember when they won the election?
The 1.5.
The 1.5 promise, which they said wouldn't cost anything, and they were going to fund it out of eliminating waste and finding efficiencies, which was all a load of rubbish. They ended up putting new taxes on people, $32 billion over 2 years to pay for that 1.5. And one of the taxes that they put was a GCT on electricity. Now, we're glad that that rate is going to be reduced from 15 to 7%, bearing in mind that the first 150 kilowatt usage per month is exempt. They're going to have to put in a rebate system so that those people are not worse off, because currently, if you are on the first 150 kilowatt hours of consumption, you weren't paying any GCT. Now you're going to be paying 7%. So to equalize that, there's going to have to be some subsidy passed through, and that's what they're talking about, this rebate idea. We're not objecting to that, but it's just, I just wanted to make the point that this is something which has really been necessitated as a result of something that they did back in 2010.
Right, I think that was an important point I wanted you to make to the Jamaican people. So there's no circumventing dealing with the cost of energy if we want to achieve higher sustainable levels of growth.
How we plan to bring it down. So the JPS license expires in 2027. The government has to signal the intention to renegotiate it. There are things we want to do. We want to democratize the grid. We wanted to ensure that when cheaper sources of energy come into JPS, that the consumers benefit from that. right? So you have a more transparent pricing mechanism. We want to increase what people get from net billing. So if you generate your own electricity right now through solar or wind and you sell back to the grid, the rate that is offered is not attractive to incentivize people to go the renewables route. We also want to introduce power wheeling. That was on the cards when we left in 2016. If you're a business with multiple locations, you can generate in one and provide to another location. So there are plans that are in place that have not been implemented by this administration, which will bring down the cost of energy. For special economic zones, which are critical to driving economic growth, we want to put in place a system where they can generate and provide electricity within that zone. Because companies are not going to come to Jamaica when you're at 40 US cents per kilowatt hour.
And your economy
will
not be competitive.
Cannot be competitive when Trinidad is at 6 or 8 cents.
We're at 40 something.
We're 40 US cents per kilowatt hour.
Yeah. I mean, we were the ones who introduced the special economic zones as a mechanism to encourage investment and global competitiveness. But the poor energy policy of this government means that the level of investment that we should have seen in special economic zones hasn't been where we would have liked, because it's simply not practical for many businesses to come and invest there and pay those high electricity rates. So one of the things, apart from encouraging renewables and being much more proactive around getting investment at that level to bring down costs across the board and solving the problem of the theft and what have you, we're also looking to make the SEZs more competitive and attractive by allowing power to be sold within the SEZ at a rate determined by whoever's producing it there. But presently they can't do that because it would infringe the JPS license. But with the renegotiation of the license, that's something that we would want to make sure is allowed so that the SEZs can benefit from lower cost of energy.
Right. These are all initiatives that we have to, with the focus, implement to bring down the cost of energy, to make our economy more competitive. We're moving into, gentlemen, our final E, the final pillar of our growth strategy. That's geared towards achieving export-led growth, innovation-led growth. And that's the emerging economies, the culture and the creative industries. I'll start with you, Julian. You made a commitment for a $1 billion fund in your presentation. You have received some criticism for it. I think people have misconstrued it to think that...
I think deliberately so.
Deliberately so for it, yeah. That you're going to take taxpayers' money to give TikTokers, etc. But I want you to explain the significance of the cultural and creative economies and untapped potential for economic growth. And why we need to build this out.
If you think of who would be considered the new national heroes in Jamaica, our leaders already said, we'd recognize Bob Marley.
I wanna love you.
And Miss Lou.
Rain or fall, but dirty tough.
Right? Usain Bolt would probably be another candidate.
Usain Bolt storming through, he takes it again.
If you think of the heroes, the people who Jamaicans, not just in Jamaica, but across the world, look up to. If you travel as a Jamaican, the names that you hear, they all come from the cultural and creative industries, including sport. And that has been that has allowed Jamaica to punch way above its weight. But it's a very undefined, very informal type sector. What we are saying is we're going to put a $1 billion fund. It will support artists, musicians, painters, potters, the full array, singers, the full array of persons who operate within this industry. They're very talented, but they're not necessarily the best business persons. So when I provide the support, they can help them to build out their business plans, because many of them are earning a lot of foreign exchange, not necessarily on the radar, right? And so the fund goes beyond. We know something was done for film, but we're going beyond that. And we're being more broader to include all the categories. There are about 29 subcategories under cultural and creative industries. And we believe there's tremendous potential for
culinary
growth.
Arts,
There's so many
Jamaican
sectors.
food, drama. Yeah.
And we haven't heard anything of that film fund since an announcement.
I mean, what I've heard is there hasn't been any dispersals. It seems to be a lot of internal bureaucracy. But I don't think there's been a dollar disbursed as yet, even though I know there have been a lot of applications to the fund for various reasons. So we recognize this as an area for growth, an area for driving export-led growth, an area that Jamaicans naturally have the creativity, the innovation, and the talent, and we're going to put the resources behind it to support its growth.
Yeah, it's like a niche market for us where we have that degree of competitiveness relative to other global economies. You made a commitment to create 24-hour entertainment zones in your presentation. Why are we doing that?
Well, because we need places where entertainment can take place, and in hours where, you know, if it was in a community, it might disturb people, and that would be a problem. So we need to find locations, and you know, this was something that we developed, and when we were last in, we developed a policy around it. Senator Damian Crawford was then a junior minister in the entertainment ministry, and he came up with the entertainment zone concept and so on. And just very recently, we've seen the governments, after 9 years, finally starting to do something in this direction. We want to ensure that there are places where people can go and enjoy entertainment without disturbing others, and where promoters can make some money so that the industry can grow. You know, the critical thing I think that needs to be said about the cultural and creative industries is that it is so grassroots, it's so wide and broad. You know, it's talented young people. So you all across Jamaica in different genres. So, you know, whereas getting behind business and so on ensures that the economy can be driven at the upper levels, we want to also make sure that the creatives have the support so that they can generate their own livelihoods and the profits that they will make, which will strengthen the economy and strengthen Jamaica's brand. Because we don't want Jamaica's amazing brand to be devalued. We want Jamaica's amazing brand to continue to be reinforced and refreshed, so that we can, going into the future, continue to play the role that we currently play as a country, leading the culture and the what's cool around the world. We're very, very involved in all of that, and we need to maintain that. So we must support the creative industries. We have a natural affinity for it. We're good at it. People rate us all over the world for it, and we need to make sure that we support it.
All right, so it's about leveraging our cultural heritage to get that kind of growth potential out, to add to export-led growth. You made a commitment in that regard to honoring cultural icons, Bob Marley and Louise Bennett, as national heroes. People have been asking, is this necessary? Why should we do it?
I think it's very important. I think that they deserve it. I mean, I don't think there's any Jamaican who has done more to put our country on the map in a positive way than Bob Marley. I mean, his music has lived on. He died, 40 odd years ago, and his music continues to inspire everyone across the world. There was just the other day in Toronto, there was a mass in some very established church, which was all put to the theme by his music. I've seen choirs of children drawn from all over the world singing his music. People find that music inspiring. Liberation movements have relied on it for moral rearmament, for moral support, because of the message in his music. I think it's only appropriate that we recognize him as a hero. He's a hero to the world, and he must be a hero to Jamaica. And then Louise Bennett, she's the one who really made our language, our indigenous language, the language that we have developed as a people, which was very much looked down on because of the elitism in the country and the class structure that we had coming out of colonialism. And she showed it for the vibrant language that it is. And it's a very critical part of our culture, is our language. And it's being increasingly recognized internationally. People want to understand it, they want to learn it. And she was a tremendous purveyor, not only of the language, but of the expressions of language, poetry and music. So Miss Blue, and also, we only have one female heroine, who's Nanny of the Maroons, and we think there needs to be more gender balance there as well, so that our ladies, our young girls, can see heroines who they can emulate as well, not just men. So yes, Miss Lou and Bob Marley are deserving of it.
All right. So we have discussed all the 5 E's, the 5 pillars of our growth strategy. And this is geared towards what we call export-led growth. And Julian, you touched a lot on that, saying we can't really be wealthy as a nation if we sell to 3 million
people. And the reality is that we have to earn foreign exchange. We import so many things into the country. It's a drain on our resources. things that, frankly, we can produce for ourselves and not just consume. Importantly, for food security, we need to produce more of the things and support our farmers. But there's a Jamaican diaspora abroad. But even beyond that, we're now seeing products getting into the mainstream, whether it's in the US or in the UK, because they are products. Somebody told me 2 days ago, and I found this hard to believe, that a bottle of pickle pepper sauce was selling for $76 US. 76, right? And the challenges in finding the raw material, etc. So there are niches, there are products and services that we can be competitive in globally. We have to provide the support for our local farmers, our agro producers, in spices as well. You know, there are some things that the world wants that we have, but our entrepreneurs need that push. And we are here as a government coming in to provide that support. We earn the foreign exchange, it comes back into the economy, it grows our economy. That's what we're about.
And we're looking at exports broadly, eh? I mean, in other words, I'm seeing it as something that is basically essentially making us resilient, more self-sufficient in foreign exchange. That's really what it's about. And, you know, our energy policy, which is designed to reduce our dependence on hydrocarbons and, you know, oil and gas and move to renewables, is all about building that kind of resilience, shoring up a balance of payments so we don't have to use foreign exchange for things that we can avoid, because
we don't have to rely on remittances, given the precarious nature of that right now. I think you want to touch on that briefly.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's true. I mean, and I made that point in my budget presentation. You know, we are very dependent on remittances. We are grateful to the Jamaican diaspora for the support that they give our society, our economy, and so on. But the geopolitics of the world that's becoming more manifest now shows that it's not something you can just take for granted that you'll always have access to that. And also, as generations pass and the new generations come on stream, depending on the level of migration, you might find that the family connections are not as strong in future generations as they are now, and the flows aren't as strong either coming back. So we need to move away from a dependence on remittances to a dependence on other sources that will be able to sustain us going forward. So the cultural and creative industries is one. Saving our energy costs through using renewables is another. And supporting agriculture, export-led agriculture, is another critical element of that as well.
Right, we have certainly discussed a lot. In this part, we could not have discussed everything from the presentations that you delivered in the budget debate. So we will have another part to this, our People's Parliament, where we'll look at some of the proposals to many of the other issues that are facing Jamaican people. You spoke about agriculture. In the next segment, you'll have an opportunity. I saw the minister responding to you.
And then you saw the farmers in his own constituency who responded to him, who said that, listen, you know, pretty talk is talk.
Right.
They're not experiencing any of the things he's talking about, you know. And the reality is that, you know, that we get a lot from this government. They say they're doing things, but it does not translate on the ground in terms of impacting the quality of life of the Jamaican people.
Right, so the farmers underscore the point that there's a big dichotomy between talk and action. We're going to get more into the agricultural policies in the next PNP government. We're going to talk more about crime and security, healthcare, a new deal for public sector workers, how we're going to approach addressing some of the challenges that they face. But that is it for this part of our People's Parliament. It was a pleasure to have you watch us, and it was a pleasure to have our leader of the opposition and party president, Mr. Mark Golding, and our opposition spokesperson for finance. I am Cleveland Tomlinson. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching part 1 of our People's Parliament, the 2025 budget edition. Remember, we have part 2 coming soon, so stay tuned.